Hello, I'm Mark Thielman with Payroll.org, and I'd like to welcome you to Why Payroll Execs Are Moving to Virtual Pay Accounts. And with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for today, Johnny Nash, Payments Director, and Ian Giles, Global Payroll Strategist, both with Papaya Global. Let's welcome Johnny and Ian.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my name is Ian Giles. I've worked in payroll for the last 25 years in all kinds of industries, from retail and beauty to aerospace, in all types of businesses, from startup to matrixed environments across the globe. I provided leadership and strategy to populations of over 100,000 employees in more than 170 countries. Today, I'm the payroll strategist for Papaya Global. As Mark said, I work across the business, managing and building external relationships, supporting enterprise clients and solutions, as well as acting as an advisor. For those of you that don't know who Papaya Global is, Papaya is the first payroll and payments company to make the Time 100 list for most influential companies in the world. We provide payroll, payments, and workforce management to all employee types in over 160 countries. I am pleased to say that we also have, as Mark said, Johnny Nash with us today. Johnny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's lovely to meet you all, and thank you very much for your time. As Ian said, my name is Johnny Nash, and I'm the Payments Director here at Papaya Global. I've been in the payments industry for over 10 years, and specifically working on the payroll and payments sector for over 7 years. I was fascinated by the complexity, the difficulty, and all of the above of payroll payments, and decided to kind of make a real go at that over the last 5 or 6 years, where I've kind of had a variety of different roles on the provider side and also on the vendor side from a payroll perspective. So really looking forward to this conversation today. And yeah, thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. We'll just give everybody another couple of, another 30 seconds or so to join. We all work back to back these days, so we'll kind of let them do that. So it'll be quite interesting, and I can see it going on already, just to hear where everybody is. It's nice to kind of like see where everybody comes from, and I really do hope it's much sunnier than it is in the UK today.
Certainly not the peak of the sunshine, is it?
It's not, no, it's raining here. It's very, very dreary, and I wish I was somewhere else at this moment in time. Okay, so let's get started. Our agenda for today is as follows. We are going to be looking at the challenges of managing global payroll, why companies maintain separate bank accounts, payroll virtual wallets versus payroll bank accounts, Papaya payroll payments, forecasting payroll costs using virtual payroll accounts, streamlining Papaya Global payroll payments as a strategic asset. We'll also go over a recap, and that should leave us time at the very, very end for a Q&A session. So as the title of the webinar suggests, payroll execs are moving to virtual payroll accounts, and here is why. As dispersed, remote and global workforces become more and more common and managing them becomes more and more complex, global organizations are looking to find solutions and new ways to streamline processes, especially from a payroll and cross-border payments standpoint. Many organizations maintain separate bank accounts just for payroll, while some have multiple accounts in different countries. Does it make sense for companies to maintain separate bank accounts? Sometimes in different countries it does, but just for payroll, is there a better way? What role do virtual accounts and digital wallets, also known as virtual wallets, play in helping multinational companies streamline the ever so complex processes of making payroll payments accurately, efficiently, securely, and on time? During this webinar, we'll walk you through the global pros and cons of a payroll wallet versus a payroll bank account, how companies accurately forecast their payroll costs to increase working capital, and how streamlining global payroll payments can turn them from a siloed pain into a strategic asset. So payroll can be difficult enough in one country, but when you're doing it globally, it's next level and beyond. It becomes complex for a variety of reasons, most importantly, regulations, compliance, data security, and banking rules. Then there are the sheer numbers. They add further complexity. The global workforce is currently 3.5 billion people. By 2030, it's estimated that in Africa alone, they will contribute a further 1.1 billion people. That number is currently 500 million, just for scale. Then factor in that there are some 230 million businesses and growing, all doing their own thing around the world. In the traditional payroll model, there's often an overwhelming number of different systems, leading to time-consuming manual processes and silos. The number of integrations can be non-existent, in large amounts, and or very, very basic. There's no real consistency or framework. We're living in an era of tech, but payroll has been slow to get on board. In fact, as much as 25% of payroll is still done by hand, often with pen and paper, and that just blows my mind every time I think about it. To give you an idea of how far there still is to come, according to Deloitte, only 11% of businesses say they have workforce data in real time. That's another number that gives me sleepless nights. And quite frankly, the more a business spends on global payroll, the less of a picture they see. The lack of visibility also extends to payroll payments. An inability to accurately track these payments can lead to compliance mishaps in the last mile of the transaction. Nearly half of global businesses have expressed that they don't have the level of standardization they need in their processes or want. And as a result, 80% of errors are due to time reporting, poor HCM data, data entry mistakes, poorly communicated hires and terminations, as well as absence management and system configurations. And then when you round it all off and the data is shipped to the wrong place, the average cost of a global data breach at this moment is $3.9 billion. Once payrolls are done, we still need to move the money around the world. Payroll and payments don't run smoothly if they rely on unnecessary multiple processes, systems, and partners. It is just not possible. So, Johnny, from a payments point of view and in your experience, what else needs to be factored into the challenges business face when they're making payments to employees or otherwise?
Good question. I always throw this back and say, what is it? What doesn't need to be included, right? And what doesn't need to be thought about? There's varying bank details, so the length of an IBAN, a SWIFT, an account number, routing code per country. There's payment timeframes, there's payment capabilities. So can you pay it from international, or do you have to pay from an in-country account? Do you have to pay from the customer's own in-country account? So there's complexity wherever you look, right? Ultimately, building a knowledge base is absolutely critical, but everywhere you look with payroll payments, they are like super payments. No ifs, buts, and maybes about it. You are all superheroes processing payments for payroll. If you look at the kind of link between fintech and payroll, it's closer than ever. I think there's now a bit more recognition that payroll payments are absolutely fundamental. And technology is allowing us to kind of move forward with that also as well. To add to that, payroll and finance need to work closer together with varying bank account details, varying banking requirements and setup processes. It is absolutely imperative that payroll and finance teams work closer together than ever. I'm always amazed when people say I've split payroll and payment. If you walk down the street and asked anyone what is payroll who doesn't work in the payroll profession, would they split the payroll payment from calculation? I would say no. So why do we as an industry accept that? Why are payroll and payments so often split and cut up? Ultimately, payroll is an end-to-end process. It's the point of data collection all the way through to paying people wherever they are, but also paying statutory authorities and non-statutory third parties. So with the world we live in and well-being being more and more important, to add to kind of the level of complexity, there's more and more benefits being offered by businesses across the world. So again, you're just looking to add more and more payments to this already complex landscape. So have you kind of got any experience, well, from your vast experience here, and I'm sure, but have you got any experience in kind of real challenges or real challenging kind of places to pay people?
I think, yeah, I mean, over the last, couple of decades, I would definitely say that the larger a business gets, the more it tends to segregate the payroll and the payments functions. there are teams doing one part of the job. There are teams feeding information into the next function, as it were, that's actually managing the payment side of things. But, you know, in my opinion and my experience, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. You know, long gone are the times where we need to create additional handoffs in the processes that we operate in. They just make them more timely, they make them less efficient, and they don't make them what they need to be. In an era of tech and an era that, you know, that we're working in today, there is no reason why we are still making this as difficult as it needs to be.
Agreed. And rightly, as you said, payroll is the single biggest liability that any business has. From a cost perspective, from an impact perspective on employees, it is absolutely critical that it's done correctly and on time. So what we mean by that is not a day before, not a day after, on payday. Payments have to be done, right? It has the biggest detrimental effect on people's well-being and many other factors if people aren't paid. I've always been amazed coming into this market kind of for the last 5 to 10 years is how little thanks the payroll team get. So I'm not sure anyone on this kind of webinar has been told thank you for processing my payroll correctly. If you have, it'd be great to hear your success story, and whether that's been from all employees or not. But ultimately, payroll is such an important cycle. We all hear about it when it goes wrong. Everyone jumps up and down when it goes wrong, but when it goes right, it's just a tick box exercise. And I think that's how it's seen from the external view as well. So yeah, it's also like, why Papaya Global, why all of this stuff? It's absolutely crucial that all of this stuff is done correctly. So leveraging the first payroll payment solution is a great first step. Providing an end-to-end payroll solution for your employees globally, again, I think is another huge process. Again, aligning and ensuring you have standardization, global processes, all of those things are absolutely key to success of businesses. Reducing the number of tools, platforms, and bank accounts they need for their global payroll too.
Couldn't agree with you more. And on the front, in terms of the thank yous for getting payroll done, I've never had 100,000 of them within a payroll cycle. Don't expect to. You do get the odd 5 or 10 or whatever it might be with the complaints where things haven't gone quite where they're meant to be. But I don't think any of us are actually doing that for the thanks anyway. We know how important a role it is, and that's why we do it. That's why we get on with it. And this is why we're talking today about making it as easy as possible for everybody that's involved in those processes.
And also,
so
imagine
moving.
I was just going to say, imagine the amount of thanks you got. If you could cover the amount of people that we cover within this webinar, I'm sure we're talking about hundreds of thousands, potentially millions. Imagine getting that many thank you notes. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many post-it notes you got, but it would definitely be an interesting task trying to clean all those up for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I can't imagine the size of my Outlook inbox if that was the case. You'd need days of the week to try to look through them and actually see what was going on and kind of try to get back to everybody. So moving on, why do companies choose to maintain separate bank accounts? There are businesses out there doing exactly this for specific countries, and I've worked in a business, or many businesses doing exactly that. I can say it doesn't always feel efficient, and it does create more work. I know we're not purposely doing that. We're not creating additional work for anybody where we don't have to, and anybody that's handling that process. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Johnny. Why do you think that we're doing that in the amount that we are?
I think many reasons. One is it's the standard. I think people have got so used to, we need a new bank account, we open an entity, and rightly so, you need it for payroll purposes. But there are a number of markets where it's not a requirement. So I think it's just been the standard and the norm that people have adopted and continue to do over years and years gone past. To add to that, people have looked at things like trust accounts and many other ways to kind of do it. So I think there's a variety. I think this is a process that needs looking at, it needs changing. But ultimately, people are very stuck with what they're familiar with, right? Change is a difficult thing. We all don't like change. So I think it's just kind of moving away from the norm, as we've said. So yeah, so it keeps a lot of track of stuff. I understand obviously the benefits of maintaining multiple bank accounts, but there's a huge amount of complexity goes with setting up a bank account, maintaining it, ensuring it can send international transfers, ensuring it's set up with the right user accesses for individual people. So the complexity is huge, but I think the honest answer is change. People haven't been able to change or haven't had necessarily the knowledge to really make that change into alternate solutions other than opening a bank account.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it is knowledge, and there is an element of resistance to change, but we've always done it that way. Is no real excuse for not looking at the benefits and the possibilities of moving on and moving into, what could almost be determined to be the next century or so. There is a lot to keep track of, and this approach does pose several challenges. So, Johnny, could you tell us about those challenges?
Yeah, of course. So there's a variety, right? There is so many different challenges with maintaining bank accounts, from visibility to access to transparency, all sorts of things like that. But firstly, having scattered bank accounts across the globe can lead to fragmented global processes. Ultimately, having different banks, different processes, different requirements, it doesn't promote that standardized global effect that a lot of businesses are trying to achieve. It can also be more complex to manage and reconcile payments efficiently. Again, different legislative requirements, different processes, different banking requirements, all play a huge factor. The decentralized nature of multiple accounts increases the potential for errors such as incorrect transfers, discrepancies in payments amounts, and so on. God forbid that you have a return of payment or a payment held in compliance or held at the intermediary bank. That also becomes even more complex, right? I hope not, but I'm sure many of you have had that experience where money is held with an intermediary account asking for more information, or money is just held within an account that you can't see. It's really, really complex to solve. And ultimately, it has a huge negative impact on, one, your internal morale, but two, if it is an employee payment, a huge negative impact on the employee satisfaction. So furthermore, addressing issues related to our workers' payroll can be time consuming, involve multiple steps, especially when separate bank accounts are involved. Resolving payment issues can take time. It can have incorrect deductions or delayed transfers, as I mentioned, and can definitely require coordination between different banking institutions, different languages, all sorts of things like that. There's also many kind of global companies that challenges that companies must deal with today with increasing urgency. Payments can't take 2 or 3 days like they used to. We are all demanding payments instant. So there are new payment methods being introduced across the world with instant SEPA, instant ACH, the challenger banks of the world like Venmo in the US and many others across the world. We as employees and businesses are demanding everything in real time. So ultimately, having multiple bank accounts using traditional banking payment routes can also be complex to manage expectations of people. So again, adds another layer of complexity and another layer of kind of problems and friction between the employer and employee potentially. Here's the bottom line, and I hope everyone's still with me. I've been talking for a while on this subject, but it's something I'm very passionate about. Adopting a dedicated technology for global payroll or payments like Papaya Global can make a process of paying your global workforce faster, smoother, safer, and more reliable, which is absolutely critical. Reliable being the key one that I want to keep touching on. The absolute key is we pay everyone on time, everywhere, at every single point in the month, right? There is no room for failure with payroll payments. We recognize all of the above, and this is why Papaya Global has built the first fully automated global payroll and payments platform, which helps streamline your KYC process. So your anti-money laundering process, your onboarding process for a virtual wallet versus a bank account. How many days does it honestly take to open a bank account nowadays? It can take days, weeks, months, even years. It can support all categories of employment, so from contractors to EOR, all the way through to your standard payroll, and it allows businesses to process global payroll and makes payments to employees, authorities, and benefits vendors through a single dashboard.
Okay, thanks for that. I would just like to one slight correction in there before we kind of end up in a huge amount of trouble. I can see there's a very, very large percentage of the audience today from the United States. We do appreciate that monthly is not the only pay cycle in the world. We do have bi-monthly and semi-weekly and all of those kind of things. So I'd just like to put that out there. It would be interesting to actually see from the audience, and I can see that they're actually already starting to do that, but what kind of experiences and pains that you've actually had whilst trying to make payments during any of your cycles. I think it would be really, really interesting just to show everybody, and there are quite a lot of you here at this moment in time, that you are not facing problems alone. We have all had them at one point in time of our life, and we're all trying to do something about it. Whilst you're doing that, I think that quite nicely segues us into our first poll.
Indeed it does, gentlemen. So, for everyone, how many bank accounts do you use to process payroll-related payments? Is it A, 1 to 4, B, 5 to 8, C, 9 or more, or D, unsure? So what do you gentlemen suspect is going to come from this?
I think personally the number is going to be very, very dependent on the number of countries that you're actually producing payroll in. If you're producing payroll in one country, there is every likelihood that you may only be using one bank account, or if you have different entities and subsidiaries, there is every possibility that you might be using multiple ones. But generally, the higher the number of countries, the higher the bank accounts will be.
Yeah, agreed. I think to add to that, it all comes down to traditional business processes. So a lot of businesses have open bank accounts for particular purposes. So some may have payroll specific bank accounts from their standard bank accounts. So I think it all depends on the number of countries and what your kind of business practices are as standard.
Well, it looks like your highest number is 1 to 4. You have some in every category, but your biggest one is 1 to 4. Is that a surprise?
I don't think it's so much of a surprise. I think the audience and seeing where they come from are kind of telling me that they are operating maybe across multiple states, but not necessarily across multiple countries. It is interesting. It's not necessarily quite the way that I thought it would have gone. I think the responses have been absolutely fantastic. I'm not quite sure I've ever seen such a high number of people clicking one of 4 buttons when we've actually sat there doing a poll in the past. I think it's absolutely great. What's really, really interesting is looking through the chat at this moment in time as well, and the amount of support people are actually getting from their direct line managers is absolutely great. It's not something that you necessarily see. You kind of like, it's payroll versus the rest of the world, but it definitely doesn't seem to be the case here, which is absolutely fantastic.
Well, I'm going to turn it back over to you and advance it to your next slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so Paytech itself has received a dramatic makeover in recent years, from the rise of QR codes to pay in restaurants. I can't believe the first time I actually zapped my phone onto a table and was able to actually to pay for something. I think what we're doing there is absolutely fantastic. And there's also an increased reliance on mobile payments for everyday purchases. In fact, I only carry my bank cards these days as a backup just in case my phone isn't actually working. But despite this Paytech evolution, payroll and payments seems to be left behind until now. Johnny, can you tell the audience what a payroll wallet is and explain what they can do to help streamline global payroll processes?
Of course, yeah. So a virtual wallet is ultimately a virtual account that you can set up in a matter of minutes or days that adds another layer of global compliance and flexibility to businesses' bank accounts. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, the need for global bank accounts is not necessarily always there. So what virtual wallets allow you to do is open a virtual wallet in multiple currencies through mobile applications or online platforms that allow you to secure data efficiently and securely, but also allow them to make purchases, transfer funds, and provide various financial activities conveniently and quickly, right? So ultimately what it does is allows things like payments to new methods, alternative payment methods, all of which is absolutely critical. We have seen a huge change in the way that people consume pay throughout COVID. We've also seen a huge change in the way that we all use our pay throughout COVID. So if you look back 10 to 15 years ago, we would have all had a bank card, which we would have done 90% of our spending on, and we would have only had a bank. Now we have a huge amount of challenger banks and other ways that we can transfer money to and from peers, family members, and so on, that ultimately is completely changing the way that we process payments. So again, I think that innovation is coming more and more into the payroll sector. And virtual wallets offer a number of advantages over traditional bank accounts. One is definitely speed. Two is compliance levels, as I said. And three is kind of the ability to view all of those banking platforms via one single unified platform. The key is speed. Ultimately, if we can process payments quicker and we can process your payroll quicker, that is absolutely key, and we can lower fees, add multiple currencies, and again, as I said, streamline those cross-border payments.
Okay, thanks for that. So let's go into the real differences between payroll bank accounts and the virtual wallet side of things. What you can see here from left to right is basically the differences. Payroll issues may seem unique to certain industries and organizations, but rest assured they are definitely challenges that are quite common in a whole world of business, the business spectrum. For example, many organizations are finding digital wallets to be an excellent solution for many of their pain points. Johnny, can you explain the advantages and the disadvantages of using virtual payroll accounts compared to maintaining separate bank accounts?
Of course. So look, what we're not here to do is say bank accounts are not going to happen. We totally, completely understand that bank accounts are a requirement for a large number of the world. For processing payroll, for creating an entity, for even processing payments in a lot of Latin American countries, some across Europe and even some in Asia. So what we're not here to do is say that the idea of bank accounts is completely going away. But ultimately, the layer of technologies that we all have now, the idea of unified platforms for end-to-end processes, what it allows you to do is become more efficient. So companies can consolidate their payroll operations, including fund collection, transfers, employee payments within a single digital platform. That's a huge benefit to businesses. Going back to the previous question, virtual wallets can solve problems of facing using separate bank accounts in different countries by streamlining the entire payroll flow. Ultimately, the key benefit is time and transparency. The key with virtual wallets is, one, you can open multi-currency accounts in a matter of days. If I said to anyone in this audience, or Ian, from your experience, what's the time frame for opening a bank in a new country, I would be amazed if you said less than a month and probably 100 man hours. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've experienced from memory, so a memory that I've wanted to put into the very back and darkest parts of my memory is 5 or 6 months.
And that's exactly it. And that can happen across the world, right? It's not, if you've got 10 countries and you're doing that 10 times, one, you would definitely have a lot of sleepless nights for sure. But two, it can be a very painful process. So again, things like technology layers, virtual wallets, and all sorts of things now allow these payments to be done more efficiently. It also allows visibility. So payroll administrators, finance teams, HR, again, looking at the chat, there's a lot of work that seems to happen between HR, finance, and payroll. And again, as Ian said, we've got some very supportive teams by the looks of things. But ultimately, the one thing that kind of definitely enables friction right now is visibility. So if you have a platform where all of your teams have access and can see exactly where money is, where payments are in real time, imagine that for all of your global workforce. Also, they offer benefit to your end recipient. So virtual wallets can definitely add value to your employees by enabling self-service, access to funds for employees regardless of their location via a virtual wallet on your phone. How many people take their phone out only when they leave the house now? When they walk their dog, they go to the shops, they do anything. Apple Pay has completely changed the way we do things, along with kind of all the other different routes of payment along with our phone. And workers can conveniently receive their salaries, make international transfers, or access everything via their phone. What honestly can you not do via your phone nowadays? And we're all very much fixed to them. So I'm sure many of us on this call have our phones dinging 100 times over with Teams, Zoom, God knows what other applications, but our phones have become such an important part of everyday life, and payments is just another part of that. So, and lastly, virtual wallets can potentially result in cost savings compared to traditional bank accounts. They can offer competitive exchange rates, lower transaction fees, or international transfer fees.
Okay, thanks for that. Just before we kind of like go into the next section, I can see within the chat that I can't believe how active it is. It's absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of concerns in relation to risk, and obviously anything that's going around in this world at this moment in time and it is cutting edge does actually take into account. Nothing out there that is worth its weight in gold isn't regulated in a manner that it's supposed to be. What I don't want to do is kind of go through any of the slides that we might do as we're kind of like going through. So we'll kind of like put a couple of those points to the side and maybe use them as the discussion, the questions towards the end. We definitely actually want to cover off the risk side of things and put any kind of concern to bed. So that takes us into our second poll. I think this is going to be a really interesting result.
So for our audience, how ready is your company to adapt new technology to execute payments? Is it A, our payments are already fully digitized? Wouldn't that be nice? B, we're ready to go for it now? C, sometime in the next 2 to 3 quarters or so? Or D, not in the foreseeable future? I'm sure that last one's not something you want to see either. So what do you think, gentlemen, about the results we see coming in so far?
I think there are going to be a lot of people that want to be ready, but aren't going to be for the foreseeable future. And I think this goes back to part of the conversation that we've been having. If there isn't knowledge out there of what the alternative is, nobody's looking for it.
I totally agree. Ian and I were having this conversation this morning on a coffee, preparing for this meeting. And ultimately, I think it's just webinars and forums like this where people can discuss new methods. Payroll and fintech have never been closer. And I think it's absolutely critical to kind of really understand what the value can be brought by kind of new technologies, but also what's the level of involvement and effort. That is absolutely key.
Excellent.
Totally.
There's our final results. So you can see you have the largest group as you're not in the foreseeable future, but you do have quite a number that are tossed up between fully digitized already and soon to come.
I think that's a great second number, but like I say, it doesn't really surprise me in the slightest that the highest score that we've actually got in there is actually that people aren't ready for the foreseeable future. Just while that poll was going on, I was actually looking through the comments, and there is one comment in there about the fact that payroll falls under finance, but the payroll director limits communication outside of the payroll team itself. I find that really, really sad because, as we are all aware, payroll is probably the greatest strategic partner in a business that you could have that you never knew you needed. You know, we have the most amount of information within any business. HR information flows into payroll. We work with it, and then we hand our results to every other part of the business. Really, really unfortunate that that's the case.
All right, well, gentlemen, I'm going to pass it back to you and move on to your next slide.
Okay, thank you. So per the Papaya Payroll Payments OS, we have built what we call a payroll operating system, a payroll OS, if you will, which is essentially an intuitive single source of truth for global payroll and payments that's both regulated and licensed. I did say we'd touch on this, so it is a very, very important part of it. Johnny, can you share in more detail why we've done this and what it means in terms of future payroll and payments?
For sure, yeah. So first and foremost, we've listened to the market. We totally understand there's a huge amount of complexity, as I've mentioned throughout this webinar, for processing payroll payments. Net salaries are the easy ones. When it comes to requirements, statutory payments and any other third parties can be incredibly complex with a number of moving parts. But also this isn't a static field, right? Payments and the way they have to be made is changing day in, day out. So it's totally impossible to track if you aren't ahead of the curve, for sure. Again, to kind of add to what Ian just mentioned, legislation is absolutely key in ensuring you use licenses. So we at Papaya are the only regulated fintech designed specifically for global payroll payments, where we're licensed in a number of markets to provide payments, to hold funds safely and compliantly for all of your payroll needs. This means you can pay your global workforce in the fastest possible time, even in countries where you don't have a bank account. Again, going back to that point of knowledge and understanding, what we want to be and what a number of businesses want to be in the market is a proactive partner, right? We need to share the wealth of knowledge that we've all gained over the number of years on how best to process payments. Ultimately, we are the first system to have built that into a consolidated view. As I mentioned, fintech and payroll are becoming closer than ever. So ensuring you have the necessary conversations, asking the necessary discovery questions, and ensuring that they can actually process the payments in the way you want them to is absolutely critical. And to kind of stop here for that point, I know Ian, me and you over a coffee again, as I said earlier, but having this conversation where you've used pretty much every provider under the sun to process payroll payments. So kind of, is there anything that you would want to add to this particular point?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say that it's not all about the accuracy, getting the numbers right, making sure that they actually hit bank accounts on the day that they're supposed to, and they're not late. There is the other side of it, and it kind of, it's not, well, it is a happy story, but it's not my greatest moment. I do recall actually sending £250,000 worth of payroll to employees 2 days early because the system that we were actually using couldn't actually auto date the payments that we were trying to make in advance. Everything seemed to be looking like it was going until I actually hit the send button to leave it sitting there for 48 hours. 10 seconds later, I get a text message to tell me that money is in my bank account. So I obviously have to have lots of conversations with lots of people, but fortunately the money was in the account so that we could actually send it to employees. And from a point of view of it actually being earlier than later and employees not getting paid on time, it went down a lot better than it would have done had it have been the other way around. But there are so many things to look at and factor. Knowing what your systems and your solutions and your partners can do is absolutely key on every different kind of level.
I totally agree. And also leveraging a purpose-built system is key. As we've said, there are so many businesses out there that offer payments, but they are built for paying invoices. They are not custom built to pay the requirements of payroll, which are super payments. There is no way, no ifs, buts, or maybes about it. Payroll payments are super payments, and it is absolutely massively important, that you do those in a certain way, for sure. Again, looking at the chat, I can see there's lots of concern and questions around security. There is plenty of security layers. Look, we as Papaya use top tier banks such as JP Morgan, Citibank, and others to optimize the payment rails that we use. There's also client money accounts, so the customer funds are held in segregated accounts, but also making sure that you are legislatively up to date is absolutely key. So having businesses that are FCA regulated across the UK and many other kind of regulations is absolutely critical in your discovery process. So again, I think it's absolutely important that you ask all of those security level questions when you're going through any discovery process with any kind of providers. The other thing to kind of add to that is, again, by utilizing those top tier 1 banks, it's absolutely critical that they maintain all the beefiest safety measures. We've all heard the horror stories of data breaches and all sorts of things like that across the world. So here at Papaya, we always make sure we utilize the biggest tier 1 banks as possible. Because Papaya does all of the above, as I've kind of mentioned, we are uniquely positioned to unify, streamline, and reduce the amount of payroll steps overall.
No, that's absolutely great. So moving on to the next slide that we've actually got, how do companies accurately forecast the payroll costs that they have using virtual bank accounts? Johnny, one of the biggest differences is that we can reduce the amount of time it takes to fund payroll. What should companies be doing with this additional time within the payroll cycle?
Ultimately using data to make good strategic decisions. Again, we was having this conversation, rubbish in, rubbish out often is the phrase that we look to use, but it's ultimately, it is so important that using the correct data and using data to make strategic decisions for the business, for cash flow reasons and many other is absolutely critical. So you can also evaluate different payroll scenarios, assess financial implications of factors, salary adjustments. So ensuring that the data you receive, you're then utilizing in the best possible way, as I keep kind of repeating myself and saying for sure throughout this. But ultimately, accurate payroll cost forecasting is not only about numbers, right? It's not just about providing that data to finance on how much you're going to need in the following month or months. It's all about compliance. With virtual payroll accounts, you can ensure compliance with local tax regulations and employment laws across multiple jurisdictions. And Papaya's global platform automates compliance checks, reduces the risks of penalties and errors.
Okay, so how about expanding on how companies can leverage virtual payroll accounts to accurately forecast payroll costs?
So they can use technology, so things like automation and AI. So I'm sure all of us have come across AI more and more recently. I actually saw one last night that was you could AI how you your child would look. So I think AI is coming more and more into everyday life. And I think no more so than payroll and payments. Ultimately, as we've kind of said throughout this webinar, payroll is such a strategic part of any business. It's also such a huge liability for any business that using automation, AI, data that you are inputting to provide accurate results or forecasts to any business is absolutely key. And with the use of virtual payroll accounts, you have the technology to do that. With bank accounts all over the world, it's really, really difficult to connect them using a single system, hence why virtual payroll accounts and technology layers have come about. To kind of, again, highlight that, it gives you access to real-time data and again, enabling that front of mind. So I know, Ian, you're very hot on kind of real-time data, access to analytics, all sorts of things like that. Have you got anything you want to share on that side?
Yeah, totally. I mean, real-time data to me means that you are in a position where you have done what was historically a large amount of the work before you needed to. If you look at post-payroll reporting in the manner that it's meant to be, it's always after the fact, is eating into the next payroll cycle, and it's time better spent getting on with valued adding activities. Imagine real-time data being able to tell you what your payroll costs are, rather than what they were. The ability to be able to actually to carve time into your payroll calendar rather than out of it means you can get to all of the things that you've never wanted to do, because payroll is such a firefighting function. Most of the time we don't get to be able to do the things that we would want to that make us more strategic. I've always measured payroll in terms of its maturity, and having real-time data and analytics means that you actually get to that full stage of payroll maturity, the gold standard, the strategic payroll that you want to be.
Agreed. So to kind of summarize, ultimately real-time visibility ensures accurate forecasting, which is absolutely key, and ultimately underpins any financial strategies that the business puts together. And with the times we're living in now on the back of COVID, with increased interest rates, political unrest, situations like what's happening in Russia, things like this are absolutely critical for business success, is capitalizing all of your data and allowing businesses to make financial strategies accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of like takes us towards our final poll. So yeah, if you could load it up for us.
Indeed, it does, gentlemen. So our last poll for our audience is, do you feel your company is viewing payroll as a strategic asset? Would that be A, this has been the case for a long time? B, we're making progress, but not there yet? C, I'm the only one here who sees the potential. That's kind of sad. Or D, no, and I don't see it happening in my lifetime. Ooh, even sadder. So give everyone a short time to answer this when we can watch those answers and see if anything surprises you there, gentlemen.
I think looking at the results as they're coming in, I think it's absolutely fantastic that people are trying to make progress. And again, going back to the knowledge piece, if you don't know what best practice is, it's difficult to kind of like get there. So the fact that people are trying to do that is absolutely fantastic. Going back to your points about things being, looking sad, there seems to be an element of that, and I'm hoping that the conversations and webinars like this is the knowledge and the information that people need to start having conversations internally within the business.
Agreed. Thing I'm always amazed about, coming relatively new into the market, as I said, 5 to 10 years, is there's no such thing as a chief payroll officer. I would love it if in the chat someone was to put their hand up if they have that title and personally congratulate you. But with payroll being such a strategic product and having such a big liability on a huge amount of things, coming from fintech into this space, it's been a huge shock to me that it's not. It often sits between HR, finance, as we've seen in the chat. So I think seeing kind of the results and being very heavily weighted towards the we're making progress is great to see.
Well, there's your final results, gentlemen. It looks like making progress is your largest category in place. That should be a promising thing to see.
I think that's great. I think it's absolutely brilliant that is the case. The fact that people are making efforts, having conversations, is the first step to absolutely anything. I think it's it's even more interesting. And Johnny knows this is a big bone of contention of mine, and I discuss it all the time. Everybody is absolutely buying into chief payroll officer. I've had those conversations for a long time. I can't see why it sits in finance. I can't see why it necessarily sits in HR. If we are the strategic partner that every business needs, it is maybe about time that payroll had a seat at the table.
Agreed.
Johnny.
I'll pass it back to you guys and let you continue.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so the mission of payroll is a simple one. We've mentioned it already, but it is to pay everybody on time, every time, accurately. Even if you've gotten the data, the legislation, the compliance, the local practices right, it can still feel very, very clunky at the end. If you're not using an OS like Papaya's, which can standardize processes and outcomes, this is likely to be the case. We help deliver real-time visibility into payroll operations. It is a permanent connection, reducing administrative workload and increasing operational efficiency. But it does more than that. It has the potential to significantly decrease the risk of non-compliance and data breaches. To have an efficient global workforce management strategy, you need to have standardized payroll and payment processes and outcomes. They can only be arrived when you have the ability to shape strategy, deliver valued adding activities, like we've already mentioned. Johnny, in your experience, is there anything else that you can share about what this means for the future of payroll payments? What capabilities will this bring?
I think overall, digital payroll solutions will revolutionize the future of payroll payments. Technology is coming, whether we like it or not. Change is coming, whether we like it or not. And I think it's just about having the necessary conversations, understanding the necessary steps, and building the knowledge base that you have to make that educated decision. Ultimately, they're going to bring greater efficiencies, seamless global operations, enhanced employee experience, which again is a huge topic I know that many payroll people are now involved in, not just HR and others. Improved compliance and accuracy is always a huge next step. Advanced analytics, heightened security, data privacy, and many, many others. But also embracing the capabilities and change. So we've mentioned a lot, it's all about building a knowledge base and embracing change. But look, that is what the industry is here to do. And that's why we have forums like this and webinars and chats like we do here. Ultimately, it's all about learning from your peers, understanding what best practices are, but also moving together to technology. It's not a one-person thing, it's an industry level thing where we all need to move to updated technologies to really see the value. But to add on top of that, streamlining payroll and payments is definitely a strategic asset that can help save time, money, and other efficiencies across the board. Again, going back to that original point I made, if you was to ask 99% of the people you walk down the street to, what is payroll? I would like to say that most of them would say it's the calculation all the way through to the payroll. And buying a vendor that calculates your payroll and not doing the payments is like buying a car without wheels. It's great, you do half the service, but you try and drive it off the forecourt and it's not going very far very quickly. So taking that one step further, it can also help to de-risk your organization. So having a business that takes full liability for processing your payments on time can definitely help de-risk your organization by utilizing industry expertise, knowledge that has been built over kind of hundreds of years of different people and different expertise. And ultimately, to kind of finalize, utilizing a payroll provider for payroll payments is absolutely critical. So using custom built technology rather than trying to use a stopgap solution is absolutely critical to the success of this. If I was to flip this question in another way, would you use a fintech to process your payroll? Or would you use a Visa or a MasterCard to process your payroll? You'd all probably jump out of the screen at me and say, no way. But ultimately, payments are utilized via a variety of different solutions all over the world. It's all about now bringing that into the payroll market and consolidating that under one roof through unified technologies. We truly understand the risks associated with the payment. And again, I'm sure everyone on this call does too. And we can also provide a proactive and compliant service to our customers. So again, looking at the chat, proactive service is absolutely key. It's not just about building knowledge and doing that transition. It's then about selecting a supplier that then works with you to ensure that all of the benefits that you believe you was going to have really come to fruition. And that's absolutely key.
Thanks, Johnny. I did say whilst we were rehearsing, this was going to feel like 5 minutes. We've actually just hit the 54 minutes. So I'm going to very, very quickly wrap up and hopefully allow us time for a couple of questions. But to summarize, I hope everybody has actually found this both insightful and a good use of their time. Before we move on to the Q&A section, let's just do a quick recap of the key points discussed throughout today. We all know that payroll can be painful. Anyone that does it or has done it knows that, but there are ways of managing pain points, embracing technology and change, looking to improve processes and removing silos wherever possible. Virtual wallets are an alternative to traditional payroll bank accounts. They can simplify and streamline global payroll processes. They provide the ability to complete all of your payroll tasks in a single solution with enhanced visibility, improve in compliance and security. There is so much to consider within the payroll cycle: data, legislation, compliance, cross-border payments, and so on. So using a payroll OS will help standardize everything that you've got to manage, as well as those outcomes. It finally helps deliver real-time visibility into payroll operations, as well as decreasing the risk of non-compliance, as we've discussed. If you want to streamline payroll and payments and make them a strategic asset, you have got to take this approach. So that is going to take us to the Q&A section of the webinar. So if we kind of like have a look through as to what it is that we've got. Mark, are there any that kind of like have sprung out from your point of view? Johnny, have you been looking any that you'd like to take?
There's a couple in here that I think you've touched on, but it would be nice to ask you directly. The very first one, because you've been talking all through this about the importance of this whole process, Cindy is asking, any suggestion on how to educate the executives on how important payroll is? You would think it's a no-brainer, but apparently not.
Absolutely fantastic question, and I'm happy to take that one. I think you need to be having conversations with payroll peers about what they are doing, the pains that they've experienced. Also share with them the kind of problems that you've had. So that's the first stage from my point of view. The next stage, or one of the following, would be to build a business case for change. It's all right saying that you want to do something, but knowing why you want to do it and what the potential outcome is the important bit. We keep saying that payroll is the most important part of any business and the biggest cost. It is time that payroll stopped operating underneath the radar and actually became the strategic partner that we have been discussing. The more we talk about payroll, the better it is for everybody in the industry.
I think just to add to that really quickly is building a clear picture to your leadership of what you're going through today. So really having all of the information, understanding the exact exact processes you're going through to pay each of the payments. So not just nets, your taxes, your social security, all of your third parties, and really laying that out to your senior leadership team is absolutely critical to kind of take that next step. Is look, show them the pain you're going through, show them the multiple people that are involved in a payment process, and then look at other providers and how you can consolidate and how you can improve that through other efficiencies like time savings and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
It's so important to have those conversations. It is time to stop taking all of your headaches and your pain points home and discussing them with your significant other half or friends. Start talking to the business about them.
Well said. Well said. All right. The next question we have is from Olga. She is asking, if the virtual wallet is an option, do the wallets have less regulated local compliance requirements? If that's so, why is that?
It's a great question, and no, so they don't. There is local regulation that absolutely applies to all types of virtual wallets and payments and so on. Ultimately, it depends on what currency you hold those wallets and a variety of other factors. What they are is regulated entities or regulated accounts that ultimately then the funds are held in our customer's name. Okay, so they're always in your name in client segregated accounts as well. So they're not money that's sat in our account with a pool of other cash. They are there in your name absolutely critically.
Well, excellent. Gentlemen, we're almost at the top of the hour. Any last minute comments you want to make before we end this?
I would just like to thank everybody for joining us today. I know we've talked at you a lot, but we are both very, very emotive about the subject, as you can kind of see. The conversations and the reactions within the chat tell us that you have been listening to what we've got to say and that you have enjoyed it, which is absolutely fantastic. So again, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank Johnny for joining me. If there are any questions after the event, please feel free to reach out to us. We are both on LinkedIn. You can see the papayaglobal.com email address, web URL on the page as well. please reach out to us if you have any questions at all.